This is not a story. This is a warning. Across America, there are places where the nightmares never end, and the truth is buried with the dead. Tonight, we open another door. Welcome to the American Nightmare. The name of the town has been changed for legal reasons. In this account, it will be referred to as Quiet Ridge. There are places where these rules already exist. Philip Hutcher arrived because he needed the work. The position had been offered quietly, filled through a placement service that specialized in remote contracts. Housing was included. The pay was consistent. The terms were non-negotiable. He had not asked many questions. Few options remained. Quiet Ridge did not appear abandoned when he arrived. The road in was maintained, the lines painted cleanly, the shoulders cut back as if trimmed on a schedule. Houses stood at measured distances from one another. Porch lights were on, even in the afternoon. Nothing suggested neglect. Nothing suggested haste. The town appeared prepared to be seen. The residents were present from the start. They stood on sidewalks, near storefronts, beside parked cars. They did not wave. They did not turn away. They looked at him as he passed, holding eye contact a moment longer than was customary, as if confirming something before allowing it to continue. When he nodded, a few returned the gesture. The smiles came late, after the acknowledgement, and they ended at the same time. Their clothing was unremarkable and yet difficult to place. Clean, pressed, ordinary. Some garments looked decades old, others merely out of fashion. There was no uniformity in era, only in restraint. No one appeared dressed for work or leisure. They appeared dressed to be outside. He noticed, without understanding why, that no one seemed surprised by him. The rules were made clear before he finished unloading the car. They were posted at the property, printed in plain type, affixed to a board near the entryway. They were repeated verbally later, without emphasis, by a man who introduced himself only long enough to be polite. No wireless communication was permitted, no cellular service, no Wi-Fi, no exceptions. The explanation was brief. Wireless signals interfered with local systems. The town functioned best without them. Landlines were provided. Emergency services were handled internally. Compliance was not optional, but it was expected. He was told this before he arrived. The listing had been explicit. The paperwork had included acknowledgments, signed and initialed, each page confirming understanding. Nothing had been hidden. Nothing had been rushed. When he asked how the rule was enforced, the man smiled, as if the question itself was unnecessary. "It isn't," he said. "People follow it." That was the end of the conversation. Throughout the afternoon, Quiet Ridge remained quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Doors opened and closed. Cars moved slowly through intersections. Voices carried only as far as needed, and then stopped. Conversations did not drift. They concluded. By evening, alone in the house, the stillness became more noticeable. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of interruption. No distant traffic, no overlapping noise. The quiet had edges. It stayed where it was supposed to. The phone sat where he had left it. He had brought it knowingly, not as an act of defiance, but habit. It had traveled with him everywhere for years. Leaving it behind had felt unnatural, like stepping outside without keys. He told himself he would not use it. He told himself that the rules were simple and reasonable and already agreed to. He told himself that nothing required immediate contact. The placement service, however, required a brief check-in upon arrival, nothing more. The landline had not yet been activated. He picked up his cell phone and attempted to call. It did not connect. No service. Immediately after he ended the call, his cell phone rang. Not a delay, not a pause. The sound began the moment the failed call ended, sharp and insistent in the quiet room. He stood still, listening to it ring, waiting for something else to happen first. Nothing did. He answered. There was no voice, no static, no breathing. The line was open but empty, as if held for a purpose that did not involve sound. He said nothing. He waited. After several seconds, the call ended. The phone went dark in his hand. Outside, Quiet Ridge remained unchanged. Lights stayed on. Houses stood where they were. The town did not react in any visible way. There was no explanation offered. There was no correction yet. The quiet returned to its place and held. Philip Hutcher woke to the same thing he had fallen asleep to. Nothing. No voices outside the windows. No vehicles in the distance. The quiet held its shape, complete enough to feel maintained. By morning, he had reduced the previous night to error and habit. The failed call could be blamed on lack of service. The ring afterward could be blamed on a device misfiring where devices were not meant to function. The silence on the line could be blamed on a connection that never existed. On the kitchen counter, the landline sat with its cord coiled neatly beside it. Overnight, a small envelope had been slid through the mail slot. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a local number printed in plain type. Assigned. Nothing else. He set the paper beside the phone and waited for further instruction that did not arrive. The placement service had required a brief check-in upon arrival. It had not specified how. In the moment, he had chosen what was familiar, not what was correct here. The difference had seemed small. He left the house in daylight to turn the move into routine. Groceries, fuel, simple tasks that would make the town feel like a place instead of an incident. The convenience store and gas pumps sat near the only active intersection he had seen. Inside, lights were on and shelves were stocked evenly. Labels faced forward as if corrected by someone with time. A radio sat behind the register. It was turned off. There were customers, few but present. They moved quietly, handling items with care that went beyond politeness. A can was set into a basket without contact. A bottle was guided into a cart by hand instead of dropped. Conversations, when they happened, remained low and brief, as if sound itself had weight. No sign explained this, no rule was posted. Yet the room behaved like noise mattered. Philip matched the pace around him. He kept his steps measured, his movements deliberate. He felt watched anyway, not with hostility, but with attention that did not soften. At the register, the clerk looked up and held his gaze. The smile Philip had noticed the day before did not appear. Philip set his items down. His hand brushed a glass bottle he had taken without thinking. It rolled toward the edge of the counter. He reached for it, late by an inch. The bottle fell and broke on the tile with a sharp, clean crack. For a moment, the sound seemed larger than the room could hold. Everything stopped. Hands paused mid-motion. Heads turned. The teenagers by the cooler went still. No one spoke. No one stepped toward the spill. They looked at Philip as if the noise had been an act, not an accident. Not anger, not fear. Attention. Philip crouched and began gathering the largest pieces, trying to do it without scraping, without making more sound. The clerk watched him the entire time. "Leave it," the clerk said quietly. Philip froze. "It'll be handled," the clerk added, as if stating procedure. Philip placed the pieces he had gathered onto the counter in a paper towel. He paid. Change was returned without coins touching one another. Outside, his footsteps sounded excessive. He drove back to the house and put the groceries away in silence, moving carefully, closing cabinets gently, as if he could undo what had happened by refusing to add to it. By late afternoon, he had almost convinced himself the store had simply confirmed what he already knew. Outsiders were noticed here. Quiet Ridge was a town that preferred control. If he adapted, the attention would fade. The assigned number lay beside the phone. He considered calling the placement service properly and completing the check-in in the approved way. The thought of sending his voice through whatever systems Quiet Ridge used made him hesitate. He told himself it could wait until morning. One more night would change nothing. At dusk, the landline rang. The sound was measured, patient, separated by clean intervals as if timed. Philip stared at it for 2 rings before lifting the receiver. "Hello," he said. There was silence. Not static, not distance. The line remained open with a clarity that made the absence of sound feel intentional. Philip listened for breath, for movement, for any indication of a person choosing not to speak. Nothing. After several seconds, the call ended. He lowered the receiver back into place carefully, minimizing the click. Philip decided he would not answer again. If silence followed contact, then silence could be maintained by refusing it. He would keep the house quiet. He would keep his days predictable. In a place like this, routine felt like compliance. The phone rang later. He let it ring. It stopped. It rang again, and again he let it stop. No knock followed, no voice called from outside. The lights did not change. The town remained calm. By the end of the evening, the house felt safer, precisely because nothing happened. The quiet returned after each unanswered ring and held, as if proving his method worked. He went to bed believing the incident had been contained. Silence, he concluded, was protection. Across Quiet Ridge, lights came on in a sequence that felt practiced. Porch lamps, kitchen windows, the single street light at the intersection. Nothing brightened the road. Nothing announced itself. The town simply continued. Outside, a car passed once, slow enough that its tires made no sound worth noticing. A door closed somewhere down the street with a soft, final click. The town kept its quiet, and Philip tried to keep his with it. Philip Hutcher stayed inside and moved carefully, as if sound traveled farther here than it should. The break of glass at the store remained with him like an after-image. He kept the lights low and waited for the landline. It rang once after dusk. He did not answer. The ringing stopped, and the quiet resumed, as if it had been waiting nearby. For a time, nothing happened. That was enough for him to begin believing again, not in safety, but in the idea that restraint might still matter. A knock sounded at the door. It was soft, polite. 2 measured impacts, then nothing. Philip waited for impatience, for repetition, for any escalation that would make the sound behave like a warning. Nothing followed. He approached the window beside the door and lifted the curtain an inch. A man stood on the porch with his hands at his sides. His clothing was older in a way that was difficult to place without trying. A cut of jacket Philip associated with photographs, pants pressed into a line that held even in the porch light. The face was familiar only because Philip had seen it the day he arrived, watching from a sidewalk, expression neutral, smile delayed and brief. The man looked directly at the window, as if he knew Philip was there. "Mr. Hutcher," he said quietly, "we need a moment." Philip did not open the door. "What is this?" he asked. "It's time," the man replied. No explanation followed, no demand. The man did not step closer. He simply waited, posture unchanged, as if patience were part of the procedure. Philip checked the lock by habit, turning it until it caught. Minutes passed. The porch boards did not creak. No footsteps retreated. Another knock came later. Same volume, same spacing. When Philip checked again, a woman stood beside the man. Her coat was long and plain. Her hair was pinned in a style that belonged to a different decade. She did not look around. She looked at the door. Later, there were three. Philip did not see anyone arrive. One moment there were two people. The next time he looked, there were three, then four. They did not gather in a cluster. They spaced themselves evenly, leaving room as if the space mattered. Their clothing varied by era in small, undeniable ways. Collars, fabrics, shoes. But their demeanor remained identical. Calm, polite, attentive. No one spoke over another. No one knocked again for a long time. The porch became a quiet line of waiting faces. Inside, Philip moved through the house, checking doors and windows. He drew curtains without snapping them. He shut cabinets gently. He tried to make the house as quiet as the town expected it to be, as if he could correct the day's mistakes by refusing to add to them. A gentle knock sounded elsewhere along the house. Not loud, not testing. The same polite certainty placed at another entrance. The landline rang again. He watched it ring. He let it stop. Silence returned, and in the silence he understood what daylight had allowed him to ignore. The town did not need him to participate. It had already noted what it needed to note. His refusal to answer had not been protection. It had only kept things orderly. At the front door, the lock turned. It was a small, familiar sound, the precise rotation of metal inside metal, not forced, not hesitant. The mechanism moved as if operated by someone who had done it many times. The door opened, not abruptly, not shoved. It swung inward to a measured distance and stopped. Porch light spilled into the entryway, and a figure stood just beyond the threshold, as if he had entered a room where he already belonged. Philip did not hear a threat. The hands he could see were empty. Behind the first figure, more shapes filled the porch. Faces watched with mild attention, their expressions unchanged by the open door. They stepped forward without haste, without conversation, each person taking their turn. Philip stepped back once. A floorboard creaked beneath him. The sound was small, but it felt larger than it should have been, and the nearest faces registered it, not with anger, but with the same corrective focus he had seen when glass met tile. Inside the house, another person stood near the hallway. Near the exit, someone else had taken a position that made leaving feel like an option already considered and set aside. From the doorway, Philip could see them clearly now. A dozen or so figures spaced along the steps and walkway, beginning to move in as the house received them. Different eras, same posture. The door remained open. The night air entered quietly. No one raised a voice. No one hurried. No one needed to. The record ends here. Thank you for joining us again this evening. If you enjoyed our story, please be so kind to hit the like button and subscribe for more. Join us again next week as we will explore 5 new locations, all terrorized by something we all loved as children, all during the same time frame. Only on American Nightmare.